Well, today we're joined by Don Presant from CanCred by Learning Agents, and we're going to be talking about expanding the use cases for digital badges beyond credentials and open recognition and using open recognition. Now, Don is an experienced educator. He's a researcher and innovator in the field of digital credentials. He's the founder and president of CanCred by Learning Agents. It's a company that provides digital credentialing solutions for education and training organizations. He's been working in this field of digital credentials for over a decade now, and he's been a key contributor for the development of the Open Badges standard. He's a sought-after speaker. He's a presenter on the topic of digital credentials. He's presented at numerous conferences that I've been to and events around the world. And he's also a member of the board of directors for the Open Badge Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization focused on advancing the use of digital badges and credentials. So, Don, it's just so great to see you. We always learn from you, and we thought this would be a nice opportunity to get your point of view on where digital badges are right now and what the opportunity is to expand their value. And just starting out with just your point of view on open recognition and where badges are, and if you think that there's where do you think we're at in the industry with using badges beyond digital credentials?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a great opportunity to be here actually. And David, I have cited you a lot over the years. I've cited IBM's use cases a lot, just to say, well, they can do it. Why can't we? Um, I like to say I wear three hats. I'm an advocate, I'm a consultant, and I'm a service provider through CanCred. So as an advocate, I discovered open badges back in 2011, right around the time that Mozilla invented them. And I was coming at it through portfolios, e-portfolios, recognition of learning and things like that. And it just struck me as such an accessible way to help people say what they and demonstrate what they know and can do, regardless of where they pick that up. So I brought that to this conference, this e-portfolio conference I've been going to since 2003, and it's kind of grown like Topsy ever since. You were at the 2016 one in Bologna when we signed the Bologna Open Recognition Declaration. So for me, it's always been that idea of accessibility and inclusivity, I guess, of recognition. So no matter where, and by that I mean often PLA, what they call prior learning assessment recognition. A lot of that is, okay, it doesn't matter where you learned it, we're going to look at it, evaluate it, and give you a credit for it. We actually go beyond that and we say, well, why do you always need formal recognition of that learning? Are there other forms of recognition that are good enough, that are more industry facing or more community facing, community of practice, things like that? So along comes micro-credentials. When I first heard that word, micro-credentials, which is very popular up here in Canada, a little less popular down in the US, where you guys still say digital badges as an inclusive term, which I think is great. Um, but when I first heard the term micro-credential, I thought, yeah, okay, yeah, smaller credentials, that can kind of work. But then I started learning more about the baggage that comes with that term, and the fact that it seemed to mean junior diplomas, if you know what I mean. So like
Mhm.
Lego degrees.
Right.
And to me, that just brings in so many issues, and basically it's a way of reinventing. It's almost like the Counter Reformation, if you know your
Yeah.
history. So that's essentially I've been involved since. There was that UNESCO thing about coming up with a definition of micro credentials, and I was invited to be on the panel at the release and sort of say what I thought about it. And basically, I'm saying, let's remember open badges that started all this, and let's remember those more open ways of recognizing what people know and can do.
Yeah, that's so I'm 100% with you on that, Don. I can remember back when I first got exposed to open badging. It was the very, very beginning of 2015, back when I was with IBM and partnered up with David to kick off the effort to get IBM's digital badging program up and running. But I know it took me a few years to really start to understand sort of the separation or meaning or definitions between the terms, credential or micro credential or digital badge or badge credential. I've heard that one as well. And eventually I came sort of to my own conclusion over time of completely separating the term badge from the term credential. In my way of looking at it, it's the badge is the container, it's that transport mechanism, and what it represents can be just about anything, right? So, in
Very
other words, the
flexible.
badge is not the thing, it represents the thing. And it sounds like that's pretty much what your line of thinking is as well.
Yeah, very much. There's a shorthand up here in Canada where they talk about micro credentials and then digital badges, almost with a, not micro credentials. Um, and I have to, that's reality. I have to live with it, but I think it is very reductionist and sort of gets away from really valuable types of recognition that don't have to be formal.
Right.
And it's incredibly limiting the power of badges. And I remember Serge Rivet was talking about if badges mean trust, how much trust is too much. And I was talking to Wayne Skipper about badges one time, and he held up his hand and he started moving his fingers. And he said, "Who's to say that my dexterity is not the most valuable capability I have in a VR world? Why would you not want to capture that?" And I think that we limit ourselves by not capturing all this information. Um, you know, I think that in many cases, and even in large companies that we've worked with, think that badges are used to capture hard skills or technical skills or something else, and they don't capture the human capabilities as well, right? And so if you're only capturing, you're at the top of this pyramid and capturing the technical skills, and you train somebody up on those, and you have an understanding of what those skills are based on their badges, their micro credentials, whatever else. But then they hate their job, or they're not going to stay in it because all we know about them is that they know how to use Excel, or they know how to use their cloud-based architect or whatever. But we don't know if they have human capabilities. We don't know if they have the business enablers for this job. We don't know if they understand the domain, or if they're even interested in that, whether it's the energy sector or something else. And so I think we have to capture all of that, don't you?
It's interesting. A lot of people in the community I'm in, that sort of open recognition type community, they talk about badges as connectors. It's a way of connecting people to opportunities, people to organizations, organizations to people. So when you talk about that person coming in, well, probably they want to know something about the company they're going to be in, and maybe something about the job that they're going to be in. So if they can connect to other people and sort of get into that talent pipeline in a more organic way, as opposed to this big all call and the funnel down. And if you have these skills lined up, the ATS sort of selects you, and then you sort of move along the conveyor belt. If it can be more organic, more like um, an ecosystem or a community, even a community of practice, then you're connecting with people, you're engaging with people based on interest, on passions, on stuff you want to learn, not necessarily stuff you have learned, right? Stuff
Mhm.
you're engaged in learning. So those are the kinds of things. So a little more holistic, a little less sort of reductionist to say, we've got these things. And, I sit in on some of those standards meetings, and it's kind of like looking through, because it is very reductionist, right? And you just want to be able to come up with something. So it's like in that job interview when they say, "Tell me about yourself." Well, if you can sort of have some of that stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the kind of the unusual thing when you think about it. If you think about, how a person's career plays out, and I look back over all the years, that I've been in the IT industry and sitting through performance reviews and things like that, sitting down, working up what are my objectives going to be for this year, and training and education and skills development has always been part of that. But that's just it. It's only been part of that. And in fact, there's probably been a bigger emphasis on, you know, the kind of accomplishments in the way of outcomes that result from having, developed those skills or attended that training. Really, what I think managers in the organization have looked at, or other kinds of things. How am I giving back? How am I contributing? Things of that nature. So it's interesting to me that when you look across a lot of organizations, and I experience this a lot because I work in a consulting capacity today to help people stand up credentialing programs. They're very, very, very almost myopically focused on documenting skills and capabilities, right? Knowledge, skills, and abilities. But then I always bring in well, wait a minute, it's not just KSAs, it's KSAOs, other achievements. Let's talk about that because
Mhm.
it's really important that an individual, if you're going to use badging, to document these kinds of things, I think it's really important that you document the full picture and help that individual build out their full profile and brand through badging.
One of the things that is being introduced in the community I'm in is this idea of selfie badges, where you give yourself a badge, and then you look for endorsement from other people. And to some extent, there's a friend of mine who works in the restaurant industry, and he put in some amazing training systems with a chain called Earl's, which is out west in Canada. And he had this whole program of working people up where they might start as a dishwasher and work their way up into being cook, executive chef, and then even a manager. And it was all soft skills based, and it was based on a conversation with the person saying, how do you think you're doing this in terms of, say, customer service, dealing with difficult people? Let's talk about, the last month when you had that big issue. And it's working people up. So taking that concept and saying, what if you could have badges to say, I did a hard thing, and you define what that hard thing was and why it's important, and then look for support from other people to do that. So instead of pre-thinking that you need to take this course, so that'll get you this far along
Right.
or whatever, right? So it's that idea. So recognition is a conversation, you might say.
I was at early on, well, when we started the program at IBM, the idea was that we would have a program that had a certain level of trust and a certain level of, I don't want to use the word rigor, but we basically said that there had to be an assessment associated with every one of our digital badges. And that pretty much is the way that program continues to work. But early on, I was at the Urban Institute. And it was a very much of a think tank type of panel. So I was on, one of these panels, right? And there were a lot of, professors from different colleges around that were there, and they were asking very intellectual questions. And when I was done and the thing was over, I expected to talk to a few of them. But there were several inner city youth, these young African American men that were in the room. They were probably about 18 years old, which was kind of, it was really refreshing to see them come into this room, which seemed like this very academic setting. And they came up to me first. And they said, we want to earn these badges that you have at IBM that are these, data science and these other types of badges. How do we do it? And I started talking to them about their hobbies and things like that. And they were typical, young men and young women type hobbies. They were interested in sports. They were interested in fishing. They were interested in, culture and music and things like that, right?
Right.
And I started thinking about it. I left that room thinking, we are really limiting ourselves. Because if I'm able to capture somebody who doesn't have any kind of schooling, but they have a passion or an interest in fishing, and I can get them some of these skills, these math or technical skills, I can get them a job working at Cabela's or some outdoor world place. And they're going to love it because they're going to take their passion, but now they have some of these business skills that are needed. Or if they're interested in music, that's a really good transition to math or to science. And so maybe they can use that. And so it really changed my point of view back to what you're saying about expanding the value of badges and to allow some self-assertions for these badges. And I love the idea of the endorsement too.
Right. So a couple of things you've made me think of. I'm doing some work right now with Cal State Dominguez Hills, and that's a lot about first gen students, transition students, going from the 2-year college to the 4-year university, and issues of retention and student success around that. and working with a wonderful woman, Krista Rolls, that I hope will keynote at our Epic in Vienna in December. But essentially, her big focus is to say, think of what got you here. Think about that community that you got here and that community that you helped. Can we help you tell your story while you're here? So it's not just about I took this course about public speaking or whatever. It's I did this in the community. This is how I applied my learning. This is how I'm going to take it forward. Maybe aligned with like sustainable development goals. This is my passion in life. And this is how I'm going to use my skills to do it. So again, sort of picking up on that Cabela's idea, maybe there's a passion for the environment that or wetlands or whatever that's coming out of that, right? Um, and the other element was there's a really interesting keynote that was at Epic last year called Clock Your Skills. And it's basically taking, this is before formal recognition, industry and formal recognition in parallel of skills in the creative industries that are aligned to the European qualifications framework. So they take BIPOC people who are working in the music industry and they say, you're actually operating at a level of an advanced apprentice. So let's see if we can get you some recognition. So they do some work integrated learning. They brought in some evidence maybe, and they do a bit of reflection, et cetera. And then they start getting these this college level. So it's kind of like your new collar idea, except it's focused on the creative industries. So essentially what they've set up is a parallel system where it can be totally industry facing if you want, but they have this agreement with the local Polytech University in London, Middlesex University, to get that recognition. So very authentic, very passion based, and recognizing what they know and can do in context rather than saying you have to fit this mold. It's basically to say, how can your experience be recognized over here? So really exciting stuff. And we're helping them sort of implement the badges for that. But last year, it's a real barn burner of a keynote that Denise Stanley put on last year.
Wow, that's really interesting. I'll have to go back and see if there's any information out there that we can reference to have other people exposed to that. Maybe there's a recording or
Yeah,
transcript or
happy to give
something
you a
that,
link. Yeah, there's a
yeah,
great
that would be
playlist from the conference. Yeah.
that would be fantastic. A couple of things that you've said here along the way, around community, really strike a chord. I've actually am currently working with a client over in Europe that has decided to expand their badging program beyond, knowledge and skills recognition and look at ways to apply badging to their online community environment to encourage engagement, to build that sense of community and get people talking with one another and contributing and writing articles and blogs and uploading, very brief instructional videos and things of this nature. And I can remember when I first got visibility into the opportunity to do this, I was, practically doing backflips that there was someone that was willing to expand and go to that extent. I'm wondering if you've had any exposure or seen others that have taken badging or at least discussed it, taking it in that direction, to truly, help drive that community engagement and that ecosystem from an online standpoint.
Um, I mean, that community of practice, Etienne Wenger, all that stuff, Serge Reve is jumping all over it right now over in Europe. So that whole idea of emergence and identity and lurking until you get it and then being a leader, that whole business story, lurking, a legitimate peripheral participation. Um, uh, but there's a couple of more recent examples. We're just finishing up a file for a UN organization based over in Italy, and they started with the certificates and very much inspired by the European transcript system, although not academic, but
Mhm.
very, it has to be, rigorous, etc. But they were intrigued by something about events and the idea of coming together around events and engaging people with digital badges around events. So we've come up with a sort of a junior framework for them for badges, kind of like if you've seen my spectrum of recognition on the blog, it would be more, appreciation, connection, etc. I'm going to this event, that kind of thing. So we've explored some of that for them. So they're opening up recognition and bringing in the community. The other one is, again, we're just writing up a technical note, working with a very smart person, Stella Porto, who runs the credentialing system for Inter-American Development Bank. And they've actually moved their feast from across 3 platforms now. They're on their 3rd platform. And I'm helping them with a framework and a taxonomy around that. And they're doing something really interesting, which is hydrobid, or hydrobid is what they call it. It's basically water management in Latin America and the Caribbean, and all the different parties that get involved in that. And basically tracking the status of fresh water in all those countries in the regions. And it's sort of a public sourcing thing. Universities are involved, but also NGOs and multilaterals. And what they're developing around that is you would be a community practitioner. So in other words, you somehow contributed, maybe you are a bit of an authority, or you play a different kind of role in the community. Maybe you're more of a disseminator versus an expert. And the other thing they're going to bring in, which I think is really interesting, is this concept of a learning organization. So in other words, badges for change management for organizations, and recognizing where the organization is as a badge. So if a corporation could be a person, why can't a corporation have a badge, right? So
Certainly. Yeah.
and yeah, I guess it's not a totally new idea. That it's being done in several places. But what they're doing is it's a way of putting meaning onto these MOUs that normally take forever to sign, and then they just sit there, right? So basically, the badge is kind of like a living MOU to say, okay, we signed this thing, we said we'd work on it, and here's what we've been working on lately, and starting attaching endorsements and evidence to that. That's kind of right on the edge here, but she hasn't quite implemented that, but that's where it's moving right now. Right now, she's focused on the individual community professional badge.
Wow, fascinating.
It's really interesting. The whole idea of community and going back to that, but I love that whole idea of, badges are data. And that's really what it's all about is the data. I remember we were um, originally kind of hung up on the style of the badge and the colors and all these other things. And really now we have this opportunity to really mine that data in ways that we couldn't before, and we can apply AI to it. We started applying AI, by the way, early on to the IBM badge program with Watson. And
Correct.
we found that, we had these prescribed plans for people that had go from course 1 to course 2 to course 3, and we found it looked more like an airline map. No, they're going to course 1, and then they're going to a hackathon, and then maybe they're going to, take an online course. And so therefore you could really provide a better way to get people to where they need to go by marketing along those ways. But back to the communities, one of the things I think is really amazing is the compounding value of badges and that information.
Mhm.
And in a community, I mean, and there's a real value for an organization or a company by badging those communities like Jim was talking about as well. We found that the average, we have these, people called customer support, and customer support call is very expensive. If we can get that served in a community, we can do it at a fraction of the cost. And typically, one answer to a community member is answer 7 other people's questions.
Hmm.
So it's literally a 7-to-1 benefit, and it's all done online, and it's done very quickly. And so, the idea of not only being able to, provide a real market value for a company by reducing the support calls and reducing the friction for a customer doing business with a company, but then it also increases the content that you have in your company as well. So I would think around some of the programs you're talking about, it also expands the awareness for the program and the content around it and enriches it and maybe takes it into a bigger, maybe it takes it even a different direction. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. So some of those are not staffers. Some of those are not IBM staffers. They're just people in the community.
There are community members that get badges for answering questions. So they can get, right. So they can get a badge for answering a question. And if they get that recognition, they're going to do more.
Okay, yeah. So that's like the particularly helpful Moodler badge that I like to show people. Yeah, on
Yes.
Moodle.org. Okay.
Right.
Okay, so no, that's cool. So actually, Serge, I love Serge because he's always out there somewhere and always pulling people in his direction. One of the things he's saying now is the actual recognition, the ability to recognize should be part of the community. So no matter who you are, you should be able to recognize other people, not just be recognized. Because essentially, if two people come into a community and they have no recognition, they could recognize each other and at least get a start, right? And to say, it's like when you go to those events and you talk to somebody and then you introduce that person to the rest of the group, right? It's that same idea. So he talks about the emancipation of that and what you can say about yourself and your values. It's almost like that Proust questionnaire, that Marcel Proust, where what was your greatest influence or whatever. You're actually talking about yourself. You're sharing about yourself by recognizing other things. So that's another really powerful thing in community development. And actually, it's interesting. Serge is now working with one of the key architects of the Badger system on a new platform called Orca, Open Recognition Community App, with Nate Otto. And part of it is that whole notion of I recognize you, you recognize me. We're starting to build this. We're starting to aggregate this community around our connections.
Yeah, I know in some of the work that I've been doing around badging around communities and that very thing has come up, in terms of earning criteria, right? And if you think about different thresholds of recognition that you could get as someone who's engaging in this community environment, what are some of the criteria and how other people are reacting or the kind of value they get from what you're posting, things that you're contributing, actually can be things that feed into that. And so it's right in line with what you were just saying. I think the other thing too, this again, kind of staying on this community theme, to me, it's one of the best examples of where a badge really does a super effective job of addressing what I think of as the three primary stakeholders. There's the issuer, and David, you talked about, some of the benefits back to the issuing organization where, this kind of recognition or getting people engaged and excited and earning these badges ultimately has a potential to drive down, support costs and things of that nature. The earner themselves are being recognized for, stepping out of their, core set of responsibilities and giving back and contributing, and it's helping build their eminence and helping them grow their brand. And then from a sort of consumer standpoint, and this is where I think the community, and this has been one of the more challenging areas I've encountered, is what really needs to be recognized in that badge, right? What should it be representing in the way of an achievement or just simple recognition in that? And one of the things that I've come across, and I'd be very curious as to what you think about this, Don, is yeah, there's all the specific criteria that says, okay, I got to this level and this is my contributor badge, or I went to this level and maybe now it's a super badge level. But the piece that I keep coming back to is having that badge represent someone's, like human behavior and their attributes, things of that nature. Like, are they someone that exhibit leadership qualities? They're really taking a leader kind of position in that community, to your point earlier, in bringing others along and things of that nature. And that's where I tend to steer when I think about that kind of badging. And I'm just, in terms of what it's really going to be representing, I'm just curious to your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, that's the whole soft skill versus vertical skill thing,
Yeah.
right? The badges work just so much more without thinking about it for the vertical ones. It's interesting, and I'm not sure how necessarily scalable it all is. I think it comes down, I mean, again, the crowd I run with, it's a lot of it is around that human connection, right? So once you get past the initial gates, what are you going to be like to work with? What would it be like to work with you? Are you a psycho? You know,
Right,
it's like,
right, right.
like
Yeah.
so. And how do you say that? You know, do you take a test that says no, I'm not a psycho, and do you game that test? Do you talk about achievements that you've done? So again, it's a behavioral or what is it, situational interview. What would you do if? What did you do in a particular situation? So if you have that story to tell, I mean, badges are connectors. Badges can also be stories. They can be authentic stories of how you did something in a certain place at a certain time that might be transferable to a different situation. And how, I mean, how scalable that is, how searchable that is, versus do you get to a certain point and then this stuff starts to fill in once you're, at the sort of second, third interview stage? Does this stuff start to tell you what this person is really going to be like to work with, and what they might add to your situation? Um, I'm just getting going with something with it's kind of like, those disc tests, a bit like MBTI or whatever. There's a Canadian version of that to say, what kind of person are you? Are you an ideas person? Are you a decision person? Do you like to really dive into the detail, or do you want just a sort of top level? And what we're doing with that is not so much to take this thing and show your personality to other people. It's to take this thing, look at yourself, and then think about the stories you want to tell about yourself that are going to work with other people. So it's more, rather than, again, that top-down thing. It's sort of more of a bottom-up kind of thing.
Mm.
Do you know yourself in a way that it will help you engage with other people in the workplace?
Don, this has been fascinating. And going back to what you've always been preaching, that there's always this balance of how many badges is too many, and if badges are about trust, which is what you're talking about, I think we need more of them, and we need to find better ways to mine that data and to be able to filter and sort it to use it. Um, any other final remarks or thoughts or places that people should go to learn more?
Well, I would invite people to come to the Epic conference and also come to the Badge Summit. We're in partnership with NOAA on between the Badge Summit and Epic. We're going to be featuring each other's content at the respective conferences. So in July in Boulder, and then early December in Vienna. And again, it's that concept of opening up. As I say, Serge is kind of out there. I'm a bit of a wishy-washy centrist. I can see both, I can see value at both ends of the spectrum, but it should be a big tent. And I think that's the thing to leave is that what are ways in which we can value all these different kinds of badges in that big tent, and not just say that these are good and these are not those.
Awesome. Well, Don, thanks so much for being with us today. This has been a really unique topic, and one, quite frankly, I think needs to be talked about more. And that's obviously expanded use of badging, for things that go beyond, skills and knowledge and capabilities recognition. So, really appreciate your perspective on this, and sharing some of your insights.
Well, it's been my great pleasure, and I always like to learn. I learned a lot today, so thank you both.